Okay, it's online. My counter isn't advanced. Okay, we're not at all sure. Let's get our light bulb running to evolution this morning of the 20th of April in our ongoing year of panic and doom. Who knows what tomorrow will bring at the moment? We're on the air. tortuganwordpress.com. Remember, links always in the description, all the files there, open access, everybody can share and share alike. La-di-da. Okay, we're waiting for our screen to pop up to where it looks like I have an image. Do-do-do. Hello, Lisa. Ah-da-da-da-da. As you know, we are proceeding through the exciting, air quotes, exciting world of Dwayne Gish's creationism books, which for people of my age are much more familiar to me than they are to young people, because of the fact that a lot of that old 1960s, 70s, 80s creationism it's print media, is not really terribly visible, although ideas in it percolate through down to the present. So, because both of the books cite technical literature, but lack a reference bibliography, which would make it possible to figure out exactly what they're citing easily. It was a perfectly good opportunity to analyze that. Plus, comparing the two books to see how much of the original book was simply carried over into the new book, 1978 versus 1995, and what newer material was added. Is it only material technically related to stuff since 1978, or is he diving into some issues that he was bringing up or trying to that could have been brought up in the first book? Well, we'll only find out as we go through all of our little sources on that one. And this is also week number 50 of the Casey Luskin analysis, the 800 plus papers that are supposedly showing how junk DNA supports design, and Casey Luskin's line in the sand that he forced to be drawn finally, the Danster and Cardinale backed him into a corner on, to suggest that you got to have a high proportion, over 50% of these transposons and the like, junk DNA, needs to be known to be functional in order to be able to justify that. And that's what Luskin was kind of suspecting. And a lot of Luskin and Fazal Rana over in the old Earth creationist camp also kinds of thinks that in terms, they really don't like the idea of junk DNA. So they want it to be very high, maybe close to 100% functional. Well, as we've been plowing through these things, it's painfully obvious that no. The numbers that Dan Sturden called out. You mean Gish? Oh no, he died back in 2006, I think. So he's been passed on to his reward, such as there may be, around the time same time that Henry Morris checked out. But in fact, I'm trying to think too many. There are some creationists that date back to that era that are still knocking around. Jerry Bergman is apparently an old fossil like me. He typically doesn't show a current picture of himself. And when you find out what he looks like when he occasionally appears on television, you realize, I don't need to worry about any beauty contest competition with him. Don Batten, there's quite a few of the ones who were still very, very active in that period that are still knocking around. They were relatively young in many cases in that period. And are going to be continuing to be fluttering all the way down the line. But by and large, it's relatively any of the electronic media to see people siding Gish. Henry Morris is sort of like vintage, even though they may not have actually read Morris all that much. But Gish, once such a titan, the killer debater in the creationism movement, for which the term Gish Gallop was invented. He is methodologically reminds me of, to some extent, the late John Woodmarapp, who was a techno geek style citation trawler like Gish was, and Casey Luskin, that I regard as the Dwayne Gish of intelligent design. So in terms of the method, it's a useful enterprise to be able to study these older style creationists in terms of content and elements versus newer. Anyway, the ability to try to track down some of the old citations in these things are funky, as I warned at the beginning of the series, but there are examples of things that we can find. So we've got a couple little cuties as his next notes. He Latinsky from Science Digest, which is a secondary journal. It's below Scientific American, kind of bopping around in the science news level. And it's the fellow's name is Zygmunt Latinsky, who's apparently a Polish refugee, and he mainly wrote on things relating to Poles and experience during War II and all of that. 5 to 1969 for his lifespan on that. I found out information on him. It wasn't difficult. Anyway, this Science Digest blip was therefore a secondary source, general, that was alluding to what was supposed to be a fuss in France over whether evolution was a thing or not. And based on an article, presumably in French, by, quote, science writer Amy Michel, unquote. The citation gave the listing as the Science Digest piece, by the way, as being from volume 50, but that was incorrect. It was actually from volume 49. They have 2 volumes per year. And I found that out when I checked up on the source reference at archive.org, and I'll be putting a link up to that. So if you feel like poking around in there as well, you can. The title of Latinsky's things was basically riffing off of Amy Michel, Should We Burn Darwin? And to describe Michel, born 1919, died 1992, as just a, quote, science writer, was a little bit off the mark. Because by 1961, he was on a fast track to be a UFO reporter. That's why the name rings a bell with me. He was one pushing space aliens, UFO contactee stories, and all of that, starting with material in French, UFO flaps, and spreading out elsewhere. As to the evolution claims, well, it was an authority quote. In fact, I can read the whole quote to you here. From the 1978 version. This year saw the controversy rapidly growing until recently it culminated in the title, Should We Burn Darwin?, spread over 2 pages of the magazine Science et Vie, which is Science and Life, I think. The article by the science writer was based on the author's interview specialists as Mrs. Andree Tetry, professor at the famous Ecole des Etudes and world authority on problems of evolution, Professor Rene Chauvin and other noted French biologists, and on his thorough study of some 600 pages of biological data collected in collaboration with Mrs. Tetry by the late Michel Cuneau, a biologist of international fame. Amy Michel's conclusion is significant. Quote, the classical theory of evolution in its strict sense belongs to the past. Even if they do not publicly take a definite stand, almost all French specialists hold today strong mental reservations as to the validity of natural selection, unquote. And that was the squib. Well, French evolutionists had a Lamarckian streak. They were dissing a lot of the material because it was coming out of the United States or Britain. We're going to have a little bit of mentions on that in volume 2. I believe rocks were there. But looking up, half of the people on here don't have a Wikipedia page. There was one for Mrs. Andree Tetry, who was indeed a significant biologist. Nothing in the Wikipedia page, she's 1907 to 1992, indicated that she disavowed natural evolution. So are they quibbling about the role of, natural selection in a Lamarckian sense or not? Well, how can you tell? Because the secondary account in Science Digest, riffing off of a 2-page squib in a foreign language in France, UFO writer, is not telling us much. It's interesting that the various scientists that were mentioned, Chauvin and the other, Chauvin doesn't have a Wikipedia page, and one of them, including Tetry, are showing up in my where I have technical science papers and people who are co-authoring things. And international scientists do an awful lot of stuff. So whatever work they were doing was very probably at a fairly technical level. Now, the fun part comes from the next quote that Gish plays around with it when they think Darwin was evolution's messiah. Yeah, well, indeed, Lisa. This one was just a teeny little short blip, identical in both the 78 and 95 version. Quote, Fothergill refers to what he calls, quote, the paucity of evolutionary theory as a whole, unquote. That's it. Who the hell is Fothergill? Martian? Paleontologist? Geologist? What? Absolutely no idea. Gish was not identifying him. Was he assuming that he was so famous that somebody in 1978 would know instantly who he was? I don't know. But at any rate, there's somebody else that's not showing up in the main list. But he does exist, and interestingly so. So the first bit that really comes out as fun is the footnotes between the two books. They're both to an P.G. Fothergill, Nature, Volume 191, 1961. The 1978 version says it's from page 425. The 1995 version says it's from page 340. Really? That's interesting. So I had to first find out what the heck it was. I was suspecting it could have been a letter to the editor and or maybe a book review. And if a book review, well, as it turns out, he occasionally wrote book reviews for Science Magazine. So it took a bit to track things down. Again, archive.org, bless them, has the index for Nature Magazine from 1961, volume 191. So I was able to cross-check on that. And there was indeed a book review by him on page 425, which means the 1961 text, the 78 version was correct, which means the 1995 was a typo and Gish wasn't paying close attention by the time he was revising it. I'll put up a link to the Nature listing. Unfortunately, there's no text involved. It's only a bloody page long, as it turns out. And I was able, by various means, to get the whole quotation from the material, and I will be reading that to you. So it was quite clear that Fothergill was a grumpy cat when it came to leaving spiritual nature of man out of the picture. The full quote this belongs to, needless to say, Fothergill didn't like the origins of life matter, and so he was going origins or bust. And he was saying that as to the origin of life, this was writings about it were, quote, about 99% speculation and fancy and only 1% fact. The contrast here is illuminating, but, dare I say it without fear of excommunication by my fellow biologists, it also pinpoints the paucity of evolutionary theory as a whole, in spite of the brilliant expositions of its magnificent edifice by so many scientists. It also shows the weakness and barrenness of a purely materialistic concept of evolution and indicates without doubt that modern evolutionary theory has only a limited application to human beings. Why must biologists shut their eyes to the spiritual side in man, pretend it is not there, and thus remain only on the fringes of the study of the nature of man, who is demonstrably infinitely more than a mere animal? Okay. By piecing together more about his background, and I think he's also got a Wikipedia page, he was born in 1908, died in 1967, so this is quite at the tail end of his life. He was a British botanist and historian of science with checkered record in this area. Again, he's not popping up as any co-author in any technical literature in my field that I've been studying. But being that he's far enough back, that's not necessarily a problem. He wrote several books over the years. This particular interview, Evolution and Christianity, Fothergill, Philip Gilbert. Indeed, there we go. Bingo bungo. He'd written a 1952 book on the historical aspects of organic evolution. Clearly, Fothergill was a theistic evolutionist, possibly Catholic, because he seems to be awfully obsessed about what the papacy thinks about evolution. Doesn't seem to be discussing any of the Protestant angle much. At the time, the Wikipedia page was calling attention to the fact that a bunch of biologists were dumping on him in their reviews of that book because it was way behind the curve. And when there's an archive.org a copy of it, so everyone can download the whole bloody book, easy peasy, and check out for yourself. And it really does strike me how much of it's dating from like the 1920s, 1930s, so it is not really keeping up. Now, remember, 52 is before DNA. We don't yet know the mechanisms of things. This is vast amounts. You could almost chuckle that any biologist trying to write anything at all, even if the top of their field, holy smokes, we know a heck of a lot more today than we do there. Or even to some extent in 1978 when Gish was riffing off of this, let alone 1995 when Gish was still riffing off it. So the fact that DNA didn't come up in Fothergill's book is no big deal. But more importantly, fossils aren't coming up either. There's just a brief allusion to it where he's kind of bumping off past Osborne, Henry Field Osborne's notions about orthogenesis and whether evolution is progressive, incremental in sequence or not, which is a big deal back in those days. It's a dead letter and irrelevant nowadays. Now, his 1961 book that he did, and thus the same year that he was doing his Grumpy Cat in Nature magazine, is also available full. Hello, Purple. Evolution and Christians. And it actually got pretty good reviews. They were saying that it didn't do too badly in discussing the evolution issues that were coming up. He was catching up, although still there's no DNA in the index. So he's still a bit behind the curve on that one. But half the book is a lengthy exposition on the theological implications of the origin of man. He's aware of Australopithecines. He's got Neanderthal. He's recognizing the Piltdown has been thrown out, blah, blah, blah. And so it's clear that he's not falling anywhere near what you would consider an anti-evolution position. But ironically, it's very interesting as to where he is weighing in on. And whether Gish knew about this or not, whether or not he quotes Fothergill's books later on in the book, remember, there's no master index. That's why I'm compiling all of this stuff to find out what he cites. Would be interesting to see. But at any rate, the 61 book had quite a bit on where he's trying to figure out what Adam and Eve were. Are they pre-hominids? Are they from pre-Adamic man? He kind of favors the idea that Eve was either Adam's daughter or a fraternal twin. Happy-go-lucky. How this resolves much of anything, he's aware, by the way, of a date for the human species of about 100,000 years. So he's not all that bad on that remark, even though nowadays would be 3 times that far back. So in some respects, he was kind of flipping around trying to do the best he could. But overall, when you think about all the fossil record that he could have been bringing up in the evolution part of the book and all the stuff like synapsids and blah, 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 it's superficial. That there's people who have much more generic kinds of things, Time Life books and others that would be addressing much more of the substance of this than, frankly, he was. So he clearly wanted that beeline to the theology part. I'll put a note because it's going to be a relatively short little blip. The part 2 on our next installment of Casey Luskin. It should be by no means be a surprise by now that there ain't going to be no cavalry coming over the rise to capture the prize for junk DNA being all functional or even mostly functional. That especially as so many of the papers that we've been encountering are before the current reign. I was expecting more in the way of like 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 kinds of papers, because that's what the earliest stages of this listings were. But we're now burrowing along into stuff that's a decade old, 2016, the last couple of weeks. Now we're back to 2015. And there's work that was doing the groundwork for the work that we've already covered later on. But we're going to be thorough, kids. Muslims believe Adam and Eve are part of a group, interestingly. Yes, yeah, it's the God of Abraham crowd has had to tweak a lot of material back and forth. Of course, none of them paid any attention whatsoever to any hominid fossils. That's not in the Bible. And I think the arc encounter doesn't really like to think about what the hell, how to place the Australopithecines and stuff. You know, are they in the ape section or whatever? It's entirely possible over time that creationism can evolve and embrace ever larger megakinds. We'll see what happens. They've already thrown in the towel, which is why when we get down to Gish and the giraffes and things like that, we're going to be seeing where Duane Gish brand of creationism, it is directly at odds with what's in the Ark Encounter when it comes to the notion of what a transitional form could be or what an ancestral type could be. Not that Gish goes out of his way to explain too much what ancestral form should be. It's in the usual mode of saying what it can't be, which means no transitional forms possible. Anyway, there's going to be 3 of them papers from 2015, of which only one of them is a direct technical paper. The first one, Carmel Fonseca, 2015, is actually a commentary on the other paper, Cadron Herger et al. 2015, and it's working out details about how ALUs operate in RNA, microRNAs, and the whole mechanism of stabilization of RNA and all of that, which we've been covering in various details much further downstream as they figured out more and more of what's going on. Here they were just starting to lay out the groundwork. And then there's a difficult to pronounce name there because it's so long, Soundarajaran et al. From 2015 that I'll have the link up on that's also on that matter. And they're all in that ALU category. It's intriguing to think what purpose whoever stuck it on their list thought to do. A couple of them have ALU in the title, so I think that was probably trawling. But then again, I made of a point that whenever ALUs pop up, they're going to get into my data field because of the fact that it's an indication of natural evolution, and we have alluded to all of that. But because so many of these things, the farther back we're going, a lot of that realization about how many retrotransposon ALU systems there are in the primates and which subgroups have gone where and which ones originated when, that's stuff that we've already covered in previous episodes because that's future work. So who cares what they thought in 2015? Why are they bringing it up? Unless it's for padding, to make it look more impressive than it actually is. And I find that absolutely fascinating. I've also been considering, I'm pretty well down to the idea for, once we get through the Gish books, see creationism eventually saying Adam and Eve were Ardipithecus. Yeah, some of them might. We've already got the squishy zones about how creationists have had to kind of broaden and expand the boundary layers of what are human beings, to eat more and more into things and leave less and less opportunities for stuff. And it's only a matter of time. Functionally, an awful lot of creationists are functionally arguing that the human-y side of Homo habilis is actually just a peculiar Homo sapiens. Whereas the Australopithecines, they're still pretty adamant to kind of keep them out, except Ardipithecus, I think, popped up as in the human Barrowman, that I think Kurt Wise was the one that did that little puppy. That has not been a tremendous embrace, by the way. So you can see these little interesting camps within creationism as they're flailing around trying to do the little sorting issues. And of course, the fossils keep showing up. So that's going to be a major feature in the new book, where we'll try to keep this as much up to date as possible in terms of the structure of things, to get a clear sense about how creationism has evolved. In many respects, a lot of the attitudes that Marvin Lubenow and Philip Johnson and that were taking on this subject 20 years ago is irrelevant to the kinds of nitpicking that's going on in young Earth creationism. And over in intelligent design, there's an awful lot of similarity of apologetics going on in there, where they're really having to burrow down into a lot of really pesky nitpicking about how fossils are structured. Casey Luska is notorious for misrepresenting bone reconstructions and stuff like that. Whereas old Earth creationists and ones that are still riffing an awful lot about this older creationism are just obsessed about brain size, which was the obsession of the old evolutionary arguments back in the 1950s and 60s, where there was a big brains or bipedality first. And that's one of the reasons why the Piltdown hoax was constructed the way it was to give the impression of a big-brain British hominid to outdo your stupid little French Neanderthal with his hulking, brutish caveman appearance, because the Brits wanted to be on the field. With the removal of Piltdown, which was looking really implausible by the time they hit the post-war period, and then they started all the doubts, and there had been doubts about Piltdown practically from the get-go, but the guy that probably did the hoax, the discoverer of it, had died during World War I. World War I meant people really weren't doing much details on it. The casts were the only thing that were available after the war. There was a relatively narrow window of analysis that was going on. A lot of the material that would eventually blow to smithereens the picture of where this would have fit in. All of those African hominids were just starting to come in. Broom and the Australopithecines were just starting to materialize. Big blocks of evolution thinkers were Australopithecines at first because they wanted human beings. They were thinking much slower evolution, and they wanted human beings with big brains going way back, much before any of these Australopithecines that Broom was finding. And so it was a lot of tempest in a teapot from modern day perspective. And then the one big variation that has really transformed our understanding that was considered practically heresy back in 70 or 80 years ago would be that there could be hominid species living in the same region simultaneously. And that's switched gears enormously to where, it's practically, yet another version of Australopithecines living in the same time frame as the ones down in South East Africa. And then we put how far their range is, how much of it's going up towards the other part of Africa, up towards the Sahara, which went through fluctuating, not desert phases and all that stuff. Lots going on here. And so it makes the field enormously exciting. Anybody who hasn't jumped in and follows Gutsick Gibbons' stuff, she's currently in the April month, going through one day at a time, discussing neat facts about apes and us, modern gentle apes. Gutsick Gibbon, her channel is absolutely a critical thing. Anybody that wants to keep abreast of human evolution stuff, in the same way that if you want to keep abreast of genetic material and biology matters, you got to have Dan Stern Cardinale, you got to have Zach Hancock. If you want to pay attention to the paleontology and its connections to creationism, hard to beat Dapper Dino, because he's paying close attention to so many different, watching to the great pain, as well as getting over into a lot of their theological material. Yeah, she had some. Yes, Gutsik's been doing the month of April, Aperil, and it's just marvelous. Little short, the minute thingies on the new video shorts. Jackson started to do some video shorts as well. I feel no, I'll still clear of that little format. We're sticking with our clunky. Sometimes where it can be short if the YouTube connections aren't terribly good either. Who knows? But anyway, works keeps popping up on that all the time. New fossils that are helping to clarify ape distribution before you even get up into the hominids, with new stuff that's popping up in Egypt. Erica just did a neat little analysis of that. The new paper is out. That's going to be discussed, incorporated into our material in Rocks too, and all that. So we want to be as up to date as possible. Brand new paper. In fact, at the moment I'm knee deep in the Grand Canyon section in the Noah's Lost World part, and brand new paper came out in Science Magazine this week on more of the paleo channels that are going on, river diversions and channel changings around 6 million years ago that bear on how the Colorado River ends up finally doing the thing that we are familiar seeing it do through the present canyon. And all of that stuff relates to what you could tell draining from where, relates to the kind of little debris that are characteristic of particular areas that are ending up somewhere else, and therefore you're telling where things are from. Nick Zentner is doing exactly the same same thing in looking at drainage systems relating to the Snake River and the river system that's coming down, draining the Missoula flood stuff. And that is to tell where it's from based upon the unique characteristics of some of these little rock formations that are showing up in the debris fields downstream, which involves lots and lots of hard work and is practically the opposite of what's going on over in the creationism field, where the geologists that they've got, Michael Ord, Andrew Snelling, Tim Clary, and all of that, they do geology-y things, but all you have to do is to compare their output with what you're getting on regular technical papers, and it's like night and day. It's just absolutely hilarious. So anyway, let me put my thank you note for our group of I recognize well that we are in a state of uncertainty in finances, and therefore it's perfectly understandable that everybody is tightening their belts and so forth. But everybody who has been able to still stick with the old RJ, I am very appreciative and thank you very much. It helped month by month, and we will continue to do this as long as we bloody well can. So anyway, and let us assemble our little advert here for our little book. It's going to be funky to see what I'm sure Peter will be, DeTooker will be doing a new video for our advert for the new book once that's all out. Still got to figure out what I want to do in terms of the cover. We still want to maintain that geologic motif. We'll find out what little pictures are available in the publisher thing when we flip through that. Anyway, one thing after another. First, we got to get the bloody work done. I have the sneaking suspicion the font size is going to be quite small for our reference bibliography, because this one is more even a source citation maw than the first book was, because not only there's a vast amount of subjects, including human evolution, more on the geology issue and biology, but there's been 6 years of technical work that's piled up since the first book was done. So there's a lot going on. Plus, we do want to keep track of all the funky little stupid things that creationists are doing and political fallout, because is there a complete coincidence with the fact that Doug Wilson, the screwball racist pro-Southern slavery creationist in Southern Idaho with his weird little cult group, his little religious enclave is the one that Pete Hegseth, the current Secretary of Defense, belongs to? So the idea that all of these wacky loony things that we've been looking at in creationism don't have an impact on the real world and affect how people are getting blown apart or not in various parts of the world. Sorry, kids, but it does actually have a tremendous effect. And don't blame me. I voted for Harris. Okay, let's find a video here and get that queued up. Fire here has been a little bit slow on the firing range last couple of times. Come on, get started. There we go. Come on. Bring. Old man touching buttons, getting things organized. And that's on. Little signal there, having connection problems. Come on. We started default microphone. Okay, that's all up. Alrighty, now let's launch this monster and go. And that's that little puppy. Right, is so much fun. Yeah, Mondale's way back. Yeah, it's I was always ambivalent about Mondale. Nice, decent fellow, but he was very much a space travel skeptic in the sense that he was a nickel and dimer. He was a big opponent of the space shuttle program. He nickel and dimed it when he was in the Senate, to where the idea of trying to build a completely reusable spaceplane system never got off the ground. And we came up with kind of like the hybrid, clunkier version. And he was not a great fan of the space program when he was vice president under Carter. So there are ups and downs and ins and outs of things. Anyway, we've got a lot of material to plow through for our little Gish thing. It's really a surprise. He's eye to a grasshopper, as many of us were. The Gish work, I think, will be really interesting because an awful lot of young people today don't really have a sense about what a lot of older style creationism was and the attitudes there were in it. I was aware of the fact that plate tectonics and no allowed speciation was a thing in that frame. And that's gone by the wayside in modern young earth creationism. It doesn't really play a part in intelligent design because they don't care much about what actually happened in the past. So their map time is theoretically accurate chronologically, but just got cobwebs on it because they don't use it for anything. They never work out anything. Whereas young earth creationists are slam right into what the hell did the paleo world look like? What was the created world look like? Was it a supercontinent? Was it different from what we have now? Whereas in the Dwayne Gish era, Henry, in fact, we'll be alluding to it in the new book, Henry Morris, elements in one of the creation books where they're, one of the chapters was by Henry Morris. The 2007 version was still having criticisms of plate tectonics in it. And the 2019 version has left that out, cleared it and revised it to make it consistent and to argue, well, yeah, plate tectonics is really easy to explain in young earth creation and blah, blah, blah. And of course, Steve Austin, his catastrophic plate tectonics, the CPT, is kind of like the rescue mechanism of the moment in the geological frame. And it gets cited quite a bit. That material is available online, and so you can find that stuff quite easily. But the old Gish and Morris stuff is gradually being tidied up and removed from the field. They certainly deny the racism that's in Morris and all that. But anyway, the number of linkages that we'll be likely to be encountering with archive.org reminds us what a fantastic resource that is for a lot of stuff, and so many other locations as well, to where the advantage that I have in the 21st century researching a lot of this stuff is that if I had tried to do what I'm doing weekly here with these books back when the books came out, screw it. I wouldn't have been able to do that because the vast majority of the material I'd be wanting to look for would be utterly inaccessible. Whereas now, woo, it's amazing what I can glom onto. Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, indeed. Yes. The anybody that went through the period 1960 to 1980 literally lived through the switch from continental drift is not a real thing. It sounds cute, but there's no mechanism, to plate tectonics and seafloor splitting is a fact of nature, and we can show you the little magnetic bands and all that kind of stuff. And it instantly, within the period of like 5 years, just completely gear shifted to the point where L. Sprague de Camp, who I knew about because he was also a science fiction writer. He's the one that co-wrote a whole bunch of the later Conan adventure novels that pick up where the Howard estate left off. And it was a fun, fascinating character. Anyway, his book in like 1960 was highly critical of plate tectonics, or what came to be called plate tectonics, continental drift. And then, whoop, light switch. In the post Mid-Atlantic Ridge seafloor spreading data, it's a thing. Sorry, it's a reality, and all that became of data. That revolution could have taken place way earlier because I can never remember her name, whether it was Watson or Williams or something like that. The female scientist who basically saw the connection with the Mid-Atlantic Ridge back in the 1920s, but because women were so ignored, it's discussed in great detail in Neil Shubin's book on, or not Shubin, I think. Anyway, the neat little geology book. My brain is going here. Been in college before the internet, sloughing through all the physical journals. Oh yeah, and photocopying. Oh my Lord, yes. If I want, Nature magazine is a perfectly fine example. Our local library carried Science magazine, fine. But if I wanted Nature, the local public library did not do that. Yeah, indeed. The plate movements are roughly the same as what your fingernails grow. Although individual earthquake slips and stuff can be much more massive. But the Nature magazine, I'd have to go to Gonzaga. That was one of the universities here that was the most congenial. And so I would go over there, and if I found the thing, I would get, I wasn't a student there, but it's open library. And so I would check out, find the volume, schlep down the lower floor to find the video, a photocopier at 10 cents a pop, and make physical photocopies of these things. And an awful lot of the journals weren't available in there. They weren't available. Some of the paleontology things weren't available at Eastern, my alma mater there. And so you were screwed. Yeah, it was, libraries are glorious. One of my close late friends was a librarian, and he was always familiar with things. But the sheer accessibility of the technical literature, the only holes you find particularly are some journals that didn't electronically post their material to a certain date. So you might find a journal that has archives go back to like 2008. So if you're looking for a 1992 article from them, sorry. Others are the whole shebang. So everything at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, everything in Nature, all of those. Although Nature and Science require subscriptions to see a lot of that stuff. That's why you kind of ferret around, because often technical papers will be posted on college websites. An awful lot of the geology material gets popped up in the courses, PDF versions of them, what Nick Zentner does for his college courses and all of that. So there's umpteen different ways around to find things, including that little website that's got quickie access to material that's trying to open everything up for public access. So one way or another, though, I would just, as a ballpark, say that when I need to find a source, whether it's a technical argument or a book, or even in some cases newspaper material in that, I can probably find, if not full text, at least some useful insights into it 3/4 of the time easy. Whereas back before I was really getting going on this, back in the 1990s, this whole project, if I was able to get 5 or 10% of the material, that would be lucky. So from an analytical point of view, it means that anyone who wants to do a source methods analysis of things has tools at their disposal, mouse click away, easy peasy, no cost, that would have been the gift of heaven for somebody having to do all of the photocopy, schlepping, physical looking. Although there's another advantage to hard copies, especially in relationship to the internet. So let me remind you of this warning. Yes, 10 cents a page on the photocopier, indeed, yeah. Nowadays, to some extent, for example, you can do a free PDF, even if you're not a member of the college, on a lot of these things. And so you can scan a thing, make a PDF out of it, and mail it to yourself. So they're not printing anything up, and it's just an electronic access, even though you're not a school member. So much material is available on the internet. So anyway, all of this means that we have tools at our disposal to fact check material and to ground our own argument in rigorous analysis, which means absolutely nobody has an excuse for being inaccurate. Yeah. Oh, indeed, the same thing. One of the things that popped up just inadvertently in just the last couple of days happened to do with, I happen to, one of the YouTube channels I keep track of is Midas Touch, where they have a group of alternative media people who are doing the hard lifting on investigating Donald Trump and various other things. And they do it from the legal end, they do it from the political end, and they have people from Congress and politics and science and all these other areas on, and they bump into issues of anti-vax and all of this stuff. They just have Dan Meiselas happened to have an excerpt where he was looking at the current House testimony of Russell Vought, who is in the Trump administration. He's the guy at the Heritage Foundation who was responsible for the Project 2025 thing that the Trump administration supposedly didn't know anything about and wasn't going to do anything about, except the fact that they've got at least half of it already incorporated into their policy. But the thing where this really jumped out at me is that along the way in being talking about underfunding the National Institute of Health, that Vought, one, claimed that gain of function research contributed to the pandemic. No, it didn't. What source would he possibly have for this kind of thing? It'd be a neat trick because there isn't any that would support that contention. And two, that this may have been just an idiot slip of the tongue on his part, but he was saying that the National Institutes of Health were scheduled to get $42 trillion in funding. Nope. Even the Trump Defense Department isn't getting that much money, although they are certainly going after it with a couple, $1.5 trillion budget that they're asking for so that they can bomb more bridges and crap in Iran. Oh, my. And our half-drunk panic administration, they're trying to on again, off again. Only the Trump administration could say the Strait of Hormuz has been closed by Iran, so the only thing we can do to stop that is to close the Strait of Hormuz by blockading it. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. So anyway, we managed to do 3/4 of an hour. I think that's okay. We're still running as a active signal. We put our little thank you notes out, our advert for the book. Everybody stay super duper safe. We've got a nice little warm spot here in the Pacific Northwest for the time being. It was like 70 degrees today. I'm glad on that front. Worry about the other stuff in due course. Everybody where you are, worry about bad weather or stupid ice politics or any of the other murky things that could be going on in the place. And then the friends of the channel in the various spots in the world, because we have people I know from the Ukraine that have been a part of the network. Stay safe, kids, and hunker down. Watch out for the wooden penguins. And we will be catching you all next week. Ending the stream. My little button will click properly. Come on. Is our counter running? Nope. Not sure. My counter doesn't seem to be. There we go.